Everyone, back. Uh, Today, can you see this stopwatch here? Right. I have put a timer, and I'm going to start this as soon as I begin my class today. Any guesses? What am I doing today? Which story? Yeah. Come on, link it. Yeah, of course you're right. I'm going to do the story of an hour, and the minute I start, I'm going to press the start button, and when I end it, we'll go back to it and see whether I have been able to keep uh, to my target of completing the discussion within an hour. That's the that's my target for today. Let's see whether I am able to fulfill it. Yeah, it's like a kind of a race for me, a kind of, yeah, it's a crazy thing, but I thought, why not, right? So are we ready? Okay, here we go. I start. Timer begins. It might go off in course of the conversation, because I'm not going to fiddle with it, right? All right, so we are doing Kate Chopin's The Story of an Hour, which is it's a story that's going to sort of, I believe it's going to provoke you to think a lot about different aspects of life, right? If we look at when the story was written, it was as early as 1894. So we're looking at the later part of the 19th century, and it deals with main protagonist, Mrs. Mallard. Yes, Mallard, however you want to pronounce it, Mrs. Mallard. Yeah, Louise Mallard, and her reactions on learning of her husband's sudden demise. Yes, so that is the context of the story. So the setting is the Mallard household. You'll find there's a sister Josephine, there's Richard, who is a very close friend, and because they know that Louise has a heart ailment, so they decide to go easy with disclosing the news of her husband's death, because they don't want her to get into another medical complication, a sudden shock, which can really affect a person with a heart ailment, right? And now that's why when we begin the story, it is when Richard finds out that Brentley Mallard's name is a part of the list. uh, they decide to come and gently as possible, break the news to her. So that is very important. As gently as possible, it's given in the very first sentence, in the very first page, second paragraph, in broken sentences, in veiled hints. So, not directly, well, your husband has died. No, in broken sentences, in very innuendos, probably half concealing. Yes, uh, he had, and you know that there is a veracity in this news, because Richard had waited for the second telegram to come before he decided to come and break the news to Louise, right? Her reaction to this is important. She did not hear the story as many women have heard the same, with a paralyzed inability to accept its significance. So there was no shock and absolute dumbstruck. It was not that she suddenly went into a phase of absolute silence. No. What people would do if they suddenly get some paralyzing news like this. But she did something which was very natural. She just broke down immediately. She started crying. One reaction to be kept in mind. She immediately broke into tears. So that initial shock, when you don't know how to react, is not there in her case. Probably keep that in mind as a reaction being something different. Yes. Now, she just wept, like it's given wild abandonment in her sister Josephine's arms. She just wept, and then when she finished weeping, she went up to her room to be alone. Now, what Josephine and Richard did was perfect, right? I mean, anyone to break the news It's not an unreasonable assumption to believe that such a news would cause a great deal of distress. So the way they broke it was perfect. Her reaction to it was something which was, yeah, it could happen, but there was no shock, there was no moment silence or moment of intense emotion. She just broke immediately. She cried and cried as if all her sorrow came out in her tears, and then she went up to her room. It is here that something unthinkable is picturized by the author. She stood facing the open window, the sense of open. Everything about the room is very positive. Open window, comfortable armchair. She sank into it, pressed down by a physical exhaustion. The physical exhaustion means her intense crying, right? So she sank down in a comfortable chair. The window was open. She could see the open square. Again, you have the repetition of open. Open. Yes. You can transfer that open thought to perhaps what's happening in her mind. What did she see? The first, use a pencil, page 54, put number 1, new spring life. Number 2, the delicious breath of rain. Number 3, a peddler crying his wares. Number 4, distant song of someone singing. Number 5, the sparrows were twittering in the eaves. Number 6 on the next page, patches of blue sky. Now, why did I ask you to number these? Now, you see, all these different images give a sense of positivity, is something which is a reflection of everything uh, that is perfect in nature around. What do you see out of the window? You see the house, the tops of trees, where spring is in the air. New flowers are blooming. These are delicious breath of rain. So probably there's been a unseasonal rain, and you know the smell of the earth with the unseasonal rain. It's delicious. And there's something normal that is happening. The peddler, yes, who is crying his wares, it's a normal activity. Everything is normal. She's seeing everything which is normal. Happens every day. He's selling his wares from door to door, crying out. The notes of distant song which someone was singing. They're not saying whether it's a person or a bird, but there's this music in the air. Come on. A song, a music, spring, the smell, the delicious smell of the earth, the normal activities of a peddler, sparrows twittering, it's spring. So the birds are twittering, and the blue sky. Not dark clouds. Not dark clouds. The blue sky showing through the clouds. So all these picturize a lot of what? Everything that is beautiful, everything that is fine. There is there is no tragedy in nature around. Yes, there is this openness showing what? Maybe the openness translates into a very strong emotion of freedom and happiness. Very contradictory to what the situation is, very contradictory to the news that Louise receives, but it is there. It is definitely there. She sat, her head thrown back upon the chair, quite motionless, except when a sob came up into her throat. So there was pain. We are not negating the fact that there was pain. Yes, there was pain because she does regret a lot. She's thinking about the loss of her husband, who they were close to each other. Yes, because she's linked to a child who has cried itself to sleep, continues to sob in its dreams. So that death is a part of the reality, which is now probably gone into a subconscious, and her conscious self is looking at nature in its beauty around. Okay. Next, important qualities about Louise. She was young, fair, calm face, whose lines bespoke repression and even a certain strength. So two, there are two very strong adjectives used here: strength and repression. Repression, maybe she has sort of, she's not that kind of open-minded individual. Probably she has not had the sense of that supreme freedom that many of us have have experienced in our lives. For her, there is lines we spoke of repression. She's controlled herself. She's a very controlled being. There are a lot of restrictions which is apparent probably in her face, but there's also a strength. Yeah, she's not a weak character. But now there was a dull stare in her eyes. Why dull? Why dull? It's something which is smoked. Eyes are smoked with certain thoughts, probably contradictory thoughts, whose gaze was fixed away off yonder on one of the patches of blue sky. So you see the present reality. The news that she's got was about her husband's death, but the thought in her eyes is about the blue sky that she sees out there through the open window. So this contradiction causes her a lot of deep thoughts, and probably that has made her the stare in her eyes dull when they're deep in thought. Yes. It was not a glance of reflection, but rather indicated a suspension of intelligent thought. Suspension of intelligent thought. She was not thinking rationally. Yes. Does it mean suspension of intelligent thought? If she had been thinking intelligently, then what would have society demanded of her? That she mourn her husband's death. So she keeps crying. She doesn't see the blue sky. She sees the dark clouds. She doesn't hear the singing. She only hears the sobs within her. She doesn't notice the peddler crying out, selling his wares. Those things pale into insignificance because of the significant news that she has got about her husband's death. If she was a rational being thinking rationally, then those would have been her thoughts. But is she thinking rationally? Uh, that is the question asked. Yes, she is. The world around is throwing hints at her. I'm using the same hints that Josephine used to break the news to her. I'm using hints that nature is showing around. These hints are making her suspend her rational thinking and go into a period of musing, probably. Some kind of something that is growing within her, a deep sense of certain thought that is growing, not rational, probably born out of repressed feelings. Probably, could be. There was something coming to her. So it was coming from within, a thought, a gush of emotions rising to the forefront. As she was waiting for it fearfully, she was waiting for it fearfully. Why fearfully? Because this is not normal. This is not what the society would want. The society, people around would want me to cry and feel the pain of my husband's death, but there is a different emotion welling up within me. This is what Louise thinks. This is what Louise believes. What was it? She can't pinpoint the thought. She did not know. It was too subtle and elusive. Subtle and elusive. It was deep. It was there. But she could figure it out. It was coming and going. She couldn't identify it totally. She felt it creeping out of the sky. She could see it around her, from the blue skies, from the singing of the birds, from the twittering of the sparrows, from the open windows, the sounds, the scents, the color. Everything was bringing it together into her. And that emotion was welling up within her. The excitement. There was an anticipation of an emotion rising up. She was beginning to recognize this thing. that was approaching to possess her. She was striving to beat it back, not conducive to the present state. So she was trying to hold it back. She was trying to repress it. Remember, she's known to be repressive because she's also a woman of strength. So holding it back, trying to stop it from coming out, welling out, because it's not conducive to her present state of mourning that she's in. As she was striving to beat it back with her will. And what is a will like? As powerless as her two white, slender hands would have been. But she could not hold it back. For once, she was not, there was not that strength or the grit to hold that emotion back. She abandoned herself, a little whispered word escaped her slightly parted lips. So slowly, that emotion has welled up and comes out in the sense, in a word, a soft word. She says it over and over under a breath. Free, free, free. What is the emotion that has welled up inside her? The feeling that she's free. So was she in chains? Was her marriage a sense of confinement? But remember one thing. Okay, let me finish this and I'll bring. The vacant stare and the look of terror that had followed it went from her eyes. The stare and the terror probably is the guilt that the society would pin upon a widow who is not mourning for her husband but feeling that she is now free to lead her life the way she wants to. So she has now overpowered that sense of guilt. Went from her eyes. She's overpowered. Her eyes were bright with a sense of freedom. Her pulses beat fast. That excitement, the coursing blood warmed and relaxed every inch of her body because she's finally accepted her present state that she was in. What was her present state? She was free. The sense of freedom. It's like when you open a cage. When the bird is in the cage, you open the door of the cage and the bird flies out with a sense of freedom. That is the image. That is the image. She was singing, free as the wind that's flying around like the blue sky across. Yes. And she gives in to this sense of freedom that has welled up and that emotion that has welled up inside her. She did not stop to ask if it were or were not a monstrous joy that held. She allowed it. She allowed the freedom to overpower her. She allowed the joy to captivate her. A clear and exalted perception enabled her to dismiss the suggestion as trivial. Yeah. A clear and exalted perception enabled her to dismiss the suggestion as trivial. That this joy is not something small. It is a joy probably that it was deep seated, deep rooted within her, but she never paid a heed to it. Now it has come out, and it is not something very small. It is as open and as vast and as encompassing as the blue sky and the wind that blows wherever it can. Yes. So her sense of freedom is something that she accepts. Her reaction, her emotion is something that she accepts. There's a dichotomy immediately after this. She knew that she would weep again when she saw that kind, tender hands folded in death. So you see, the dichotomy here is, though we feel that she seems glad that her husband has died, the gladness is not because of the death. The gladness and the joy is because of the freedom that is an associated emotion that comes with the death. Not death per se, but the associated feeling that comes with death, the sense of freedom. Because when she thinks of Brentley, her husband, she's thinking about kind, tender hands. She's thinking about face that never looked save with love upon her fixed and grey and dead. She's thinking about her kind husband. She's thinking about a face that always looked upon her with love. She also recognizes that she will not stop crying for him. She will cry, yes, but she saw beyond that bitter moment. This is a moment of great pain. She's accepting it. This paragraph between page 57 and 58, it transits, is a very important paragraph because it's a dichotomy of two very strong feelings. She's not negating the fact that she's mourning the loss of her husband who was very kind, who loved her. But beyond this moment of tragedy, she saw a long procession of years to come that would belong to her absolutely. So, beyond that, what did she see? She saw the years of freedom that she would be able to lead a life because now it was only her life. So, the question here is the author, Kate Chopin, talking about marriage being a kind of a slavery? That is the question that is asked. And what is the last sentence? And she opened and spread her arms out to them in welcome. She is welcoming the sense of freedom that the death, which is very tragic, but which this death has brought to her, this freedom, which she is ready to accept. You've understood the dichotomy? Right. There would be no one to live for her during those coming years. She would live for herself. Very important. This is her life now. She would live according to what she wanted. She would not be dictated to by someone else. It was her life. She's going to determine how she's going to lead her life. Self determination. Probably that is her desire that comes to the forefront. There'd be no powerful will bending hers in that blind persistent with which men and women believe they have a right to impose a private will upon a fellow creature. Now, remember one thing, she's not saying that her husband was authoritative. It is something that society has brought into marriage. What has society brought into marriage? Society has brought a, a sense of a dictatorial theme into marriage, where a private, one's own freedom is being compromised because you're only thinking about the other person. So if you are not too strong and too bold, you will allow yourself to be bent. So she's not saying her husband imposed it on her, but she's saying marriage as an institution has been designed, unfortunately, by society to make it very dictatorial, where the individual will is suspended. Yes, and the individual and the marriage and the adjustment and the compromises overpowered individual sense of self determination, right? So that is what's important. A kind intention or a cruel intention made the act seem no less a crime as she looked upon it in that brief moment of illumination. What was that brief moment of illumination? That she's going to have a sense of freedom. So, a kind intention or a cruel intention made the act seem no less a crime. So, whether it was that something good that was going to come out of it, or whether marriage is going to lead to an end of all one's feelings, at that very moment, uh, whatever, it didn't matter to her because that marriage had ended with the death of her husband. So that kind of chain that was that had bound her had opened up. She had broken loose, and so the intentions now, whether kind or cruel, did not matter because at this moment, what was overpowering was she was free. She was free of all the chains of marriage, and the sense of freedom reigned supreme. And yet, again, each time she thinks about freedom, she says, Yet she had loved him sometimes. Keyword, sometimes. So it was not one of total, intense romance and love, that she forgot her own being, because her own, she was a woman of strength. So probably she maintained a happy marriage. She was a good person. Her husband was a kind human being. So they had a happy marriage, but that happy marriage was born out of compromise. She had compromised her sense of freedom. She accepted all that her husband probably wanted of her, with no malice to anyone. Yes. But she did it in her own free spirit and a sense of goodness in her heart, because she was kind and a good lady. Often she had not. What did it matter? What could love, the unsolved mystery, count for in the face of this possession of self assertion, which she suddenly recognized as the strongest impulse of her being? It didn't matter now whether she loved all the time. She didn't, because there was another feeling that had overpowered everything. Because love is an unsolved mystery. Really, we can't gauge love. How do we gauge love? She had given up her life. She had given up her freedom. That is love for her husband. So that means she loved him, because she gave up what she believed for herself through the goodness of her heart. It's not that he forced it out of her. She gave it because he was a kind man. But now at this moment, this what is most strong in her, what is the strongest emotion in her, which is she being herself. She's going to live for herself. And the next phrase is very important: free, body and soul free. She kept whispering. A reality that she just can't believe that she is now in a possession of that. She is free, free body and soul free. Her sister was at the door next. Yes, in concern, because she felt that Louise was going to cry herself to death, and she did not want her sister to suffer. So open up, Louise, for heaven's sake, open the door. What does Louise say? Go away, I'm not making myself ill. Really, and if we know. Dramatic irony, we know she's doing just the opposite. She is, what is she doing? She is rejoicing in the newfound sense of freedom that she has realized. Right? Not that she is not mourning the death of her husband. It's not the death that is making her happy, but the freedom associated with death. Remember that. No, she was drinking in a very elixir of life through that open window. And what is that elixir of life? Elixir, that nectar, that that is going to that is pumped new life into her, pumped new blood into her. That is the sense of freedom, made her live all over again. Probably this is her second coming that has happened. Yes, I mean, very hyperbolic, but I used it. Her fancy was running riot. She sort of imagining what this freedom would mean to her. Spring days, summer days, all sorts of days that would be her own. Joyous, joyous. She breathed the quick prayer that life might be long. Now she wanted to live long. Yes. Because she wanted to enjoy the sense of freedom, that for once she would do exactly what she always wanted to do. It's not that she regretted what she didn't have in the past. Remember that. That is the goodness of her. It's not that she regrets about having married. She regrets that she had a terrible life. No, she is happy with the fact that now she can live for herself, and God has granted her this. It is a fortune, a fate that has granted her this. So she's hoping that fate would also be kind to grant her a long life, so that she could spend many years of being free, live for herself. Look at the last sentence again, paragraph. It's the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth paragraph, last line. It was only yesterday she had thought with a shudder that life might be long. Probably it was just the previous day that she was regretting that, with all her ailments and all the repression, she would have to live very long, and she was not too keen about a long life. But what has the next day brought for her? Freedom. So freedom is what she was yearning, and because she has received it, now she wants a very long life. She rose at length and opened the door to her sister's importunities. Her sister was begging her, importunities, begging her, come on, open the door. Yes. There was a feverish triumph in her eyes, and she carried herself unwittingly like a goddess of victory. She has overcome her guilt about feeling sorry for her husband's death, because she's understood that she is feeling sorry for her husband's death, but along with it, she's rejoicing in the sense of freedom that the future holds for her. She's overcome it. So she's a goddess of victory. She's overpowered that sense of guilt, and she's now resigned to the fact that yes, she mourns her husband's loss, but she also is joyous about what it has brought to her, a sense of being, of a life for herself, being free, body and soul. She clasped her sister's waist and together they descended the stairs. Richard stood waiting for them at the bottom. Someone was opening the front door with a latchkey. It was Brentley Mallard, who entered, a little travel-stained, composedly carrying his gripsack and umbrella. Yes. So the effects of a journey. He had been far from the scene of accident and did not even know there had been one. He stood amazed at Josephine's piercing cry, at Richard's quick motion to screen him from the view of his wife. Again, Richard's why? Sudden shock, which is not good for a person with a heart ailment. Yes. But Richard was too late. When the doctors came, they said she had died of heart disease, of joy that kills. It is here, the last section, which I believe is steeped in irony. Steeped in irony. Yes, you see, Louise has accepted her fear, her guilt has been overcome, and she has accepted the sense of freedom and the excitement of those years that she's going to lead her own life the way she desires, right? Uh, so it's not about getting rid of her husband, it is about being charge of her own life, right? And then suddenly, what do we see? Suddenly she sees uh, this goddess of victory that she is. She sees her husband walking back into her life. And that shock is so strong. Yes. I'm not calling it, I don't know, I feel she died of heart disease, yes, definitely. But this was the shock. The shock of what? Joy that kills, or a joy that has been killed? Was this the correct diagnosis? That is the question we need to ask. Yes. So, it is a situational irony. You can understand it, right? Her shock was not joy over a husband's survival, but rather the, the shock of losing the newfound joy of the sense of freedom that was lost with her husband coming back. Yes. Because she had only a very brief experience of that sense of freedom when she would be in control of her own life. That was very brief. And when this brief period of joy goes, yes, when that brief period of joy goes, it leads to death. So, a joy that kills, or a joy, probably a joy that is dead that kills, making it confusing, but this is important, the situational irony at the very end of the story. Wow, how are we doing with time? Look at it. It's a story of an hour. I have 26 minutes to go. I've done well. So now we shall complete it within an hour. Remember, guys, we have the protagonist, Mrs. Louise Mallard. You have the sense of oppression, then the sense of freedom. There are three other characters. Richard, who doesn't speak but is instrumental in trying to protect Louise. You have Josephine, a sister, and of course Bentley Mallard, uh, the one who is, you can say, the who controls the action of the story. The setting is the household, yes, and it's a later part of the 19th century. The story is set in an hour, yes, and so if you look at the plot, the exposition is when care is taken to break the news about her husband's death due to the accident. The complication is the way she receives the news, yes, uh, the crying and then gradual acceptance. The rising action is from the acceptance of joy, and then when she walks down like a goddess of victory, having accepted the fact that though she's very, very sorry about the death of her husband, she's equally elated with the newfound sense of freedom. The climax is when Bentley arrives, Josephine screams, and Louise dies. What is the resolution? Open to interpretation. The diagnosis of the doctor. Joy that kills. Yes, it was a heart disease that killed her, but what caused the heart to stop? Joy that kills. Or the joy removed that kills. Right? So, that is what you need to remember here. Very ironic. It's dramatic also. Yes, so the situational irony is very important. Uh, uh, so, and also very important theme that we get here is the free will, the importance of free will. So unless you have the sense of freedom, one will never be able to reveal their true self. You'll always be alienated from reality. Yes, and that is important. Right? Okay, so I'll just move the timing slightly here. I'm keeping it. We'll bring it back because I need to take out the questions which are here. Yes, let me bring it out. Can you all see it? Yeah, okay. Uh, we are going to keep to the hour thing, story of an hour. We'll finish it within an hour. Um, the time is here. We'll keep it. Yeah, let's not waste time. Ah. Okay, first question, which was in the 2019 ISC paper, referring closely to the short story, the story of an hour, give an account of the thoughts and conflicts which go through Mrs. Mallad's mind when she hears about the untimely death of her husband. So the thoughts and conflicts. So the thoughts, like I told you, um, uh, the thoughts about losing her husband and the conflict, internal conflict, to accept or not to accept her happiness. The death, yes, the grief, the grieving, the pain, the loss, the kindness of her husband is all there. But together with that, the images of openness, carefree, freedom to lead one's own life the way one desires, to accept the fact that one can be free and be happy, to lead one's life one's own way. That is the conflict. Yes. Comment on the ending of the story, which is the situational irony. And that is what you have to keep in mind. What finally leads her to die? The shock of seeing her husband alive, or the shock that her newfound happiness was so short lived? Why? And was it then that did for that brief moment did she feel guilty again? Why did I think about my happiness? Yes. Because what does fate show her? That you can never be happy. You will never have your freedom. You'll be happy, yes. Your husband is back, but you'll never have your freedom. So within that minute, said, did she feel that guilt come back to her? the guilt of why did I feel happy? Why did I allow the sense of freedom to override every other emotion? Did she feel a guilt? And because I felt happy on thinking about my husband's death, that fortune plays this absolutely dirty joke with me. What was this? This entire thing was a charade. My husband is alive. And it just shows how weak I am, probably. I'm just thinking about, uh, thoughts in her mind. We don't know. Maybe nothing. Maybe there was nothing. Just that she's lost her freedom. Yes. And that is what pains her the most. Yes. Okay, next question. Eula Model is a similar kind of question. The Story of an Hour by Kate Chopin narrates the conflicting emotions of the protagonist and has an ironic conclusion. Again, conflicting. So you take the conflict, you take the thoughts, you take the situation and the different emotions that come up. Justify the statement with close references to the story. So please, freedom quotes, kindness quotes, love of a husband quotes, and then of course the contrast between the goddess of victory to the travel stained husband, and finally joy that kills. Yes. Third question. How does Kate Chopin present freedom as an elusive and a powerful emotion that both elevates the mind and also ends life in context of the story of Anna? It elevates the mind. It's an elusive and powerful emotion when it comes to Louise Mallard. Marriage for her had given her a sense of love, yes, but sometimes. But what it had taken away is probably a sense of freedom, because society, please, I'm not talking of, nowhere has the author mentioned Brentley Mallard was like that. No, he wasn't. The society dictated that marriage would be in a compromise where one's own will uh, has to be overpowered by a sense of the marriage being and the success of marriage being at the height of achievement. So you have to make it a successful marriage. For that, even if you have to sacrifice your own will and freedom, so be it. That's what society dictates, right? And those who are good at heart, those who love each other, will keep to this kind of a diktat. Yes. So here the society is to blame. Keep in mind, and that is what we have to highlight, right? Is there any other question? Yeah, I put a question for. When the doctors came, they said she had died of heart disease, of joy that kills. How appropriate is this diagnosis in context of the events that took place in the life of Mrs. Mallard? So you start from the end of joy. What is the joy? Define joy. Yes. There were different moments of joy in the story. So you can begin with that. You could begin with the different moments of joy in the story. Yes. And which was the joy that killed? All the joys died, right? Probably. Yes. Joy that it kills Mrs. Mallard. The joy of, if you take it as what the doctor diagnosed, the joy of seeing her husband alive killed her. But those of us who have read the story, those of us who have been with her inside her bedroom and seen her acceptance of leading her life with her own free will, we know that the joy of freedom that was taken away when her husband walked through the door is that which killed her. Maybe the too much of hope, too much of expectations, too much of happiness of having won a long lost sense of free will killed her. Yes. So you begin with that joy, bring in the circumstances about the tragedy in the story, and elaborate on your diagnosis. Sounds good? Let's check the time. Wow, we have done well. We still have we have met the target of finishing our discussion on the story of an hour within an hour, right? So the challenge for you is go through all that we have discussed and take any one of the questions that you wish to. All the questions are here, you have it on your video. So take any one of these questions and try to write out an answer with this stopwatch within an hour. I still have 15 minutes to spare. I've won my marathon for today. You start yours. Yes, play safe, play fair, take care of yourself. Bye for now.